All right, let's bring him in. He is a talk show host. He is an author of 2 Back to the Future books. In 2020, we had him on the podcast after he had written a book called Back from the Future. We're bringing him on again. He just released a book about 6 months ago. His most recent one is Why We Love Back to the Future, 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. It is Brad Gilmore. Brad, thanks for coming on, man.
Steve, I appreciate it. Too long since we last spoke.
I know. It's been a while. And basically, I have you on every time you write a book. So 5 years from now, you're going to write another one? We got another one coming?
If I got another Back to the Future book in me, man, I really have pulled a miracle because to find some new subjects to talk about. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? So
we're here at the 40th year anniversary this year. I went to an IMAX showing of it. And, you know, at this point in my life, when I consume things all Back to the Future, all I do, having seen the movie so many times, is I'm just looking for stuff that maybe I didn't recognize before. And in recent rewatches, I've probably watched it 3 or 4 times in the last 2 weeks, whether it was at the movie or, you know, on my DVR. I'm just looking for other things. And there's so many things that you cover in the book that are really good. And the diehard Back to the Future fans are well aware of these things, but I want to introduce it to people that maybe aren't. And one of the things that I want to discuss first is the title that Sid Sheinberg wanted to make the movie, which was Spaceman from Pluto. And I've always been sitting here going, where did that even come from? Like, there really isn't much about space in this movie outside of George's book at the end. You know, the Darth Vader scene from Planet Vulcan, I guess that's space related, but you do note, and I didn't know this until maybe a couple weeks ago when someone brought it to my attention, the comic book that Mr. Peabody's kid shows him when Marty crashes into the barn, the comic book title on that cover says Space Zombies from Pluto. So I'm like, that's right. Well, maybe that's where Sid got it from. I don't know, but can you imagine, Brad, if this movie was changed to Spaceman from Pluto?
It's one of the funny things about Sid is because, you know, I talk about in the book, he had so many actually like good things that he came up with that helped improve the script. I mean, we went from the Springtime in Paris dance to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. We went from a pet chimpanzee named Shemp to Einstein, the dog. We went from Professor Brown to Doc Brown. You know, Eileen to Lorraine. There were a lot of like some suggestions that were made that were actually really great. You know, in the history of executive notes, these are actually probably really good, substantive, made the story better notes. And then he comes with the Spaceman from Pluto, which I guess, and it says it in the memo, and I actually put the full memo that he wrote, Steven Spielberg, in the book, because I just wanted people to see the context of in which he picked this and pitched this to Steven, because it was like, oh, it's got to give it that B-movie, 50s kind of flair to it. And I'm like, man, brother, you just missed the mark completely. Yeah. And the fact that he didn't think the title Back to the Future was a good title, which to me, and perhaps it's only because of the success of the movie, or when you think about it, it's the perfect title. I don't know what else you could call it. It's one of those iconic titles. So yeah, Spaceman from Pluto doesn't make sense. But I call attention to the book that Eli Roth put that in one of his movies, A House with a Clock in Its Walls has a marquee, and on the marquee, it's playing Spaceman from Pluto.
I think one of the other things you point out in the book, and I hadn't really thought about it myself, was this being the greatest trilogy of all time. And it's funny when you think about it, because once you mentioned it, you said, really, the only other trilogy that you could think of that he could even compare was the Godfather trilogy, but Godfather 3 was so bad, generally panned by people, and Back to the Future 3 is better than Godfather 3, so therefore it makes it a better trilogy. At least I think it'd hold up against it. And then I was just thinking, man, what other trilogies are even out there? You didn't mention any more in your book, but then I was trying to think, obviously not Jaws, not Nightmare on Elm Street, not the Star Wars movies. Like, what movie franchises just stopped at exactly 3 that could even be compared to?
It was hard to, it's funny because when you think about it, there's not really many pure trilogies at that level, right? For a long time, the Indiana Jones trilogy, I would argue, that competed, but then we got a 4th and then eventually a 5th one. Star Wars has had, I don't know how many movies at this point, 12
9
or whatever it's been.
Well, the main ones, 9, I guess.
And then if you count like, Skywalker, Star Wars story, and Rogue
Yeah.
One, and then all the
Yeah.
television shows and what have you. Like, so there hasn't been a great pure trilogy. And Jurassic Park, again, boom, we eliminate that one. And so one of the ones that people bring up to me is the Dark Knight trilogy, the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy,
Mm.
which, yes, but also we've seen Batman trilogies before. So it's just hard for me to consider that a pure trilogy, which, if you give it that one, I actually still think Back to the Future is better. I think The Dark Knight is such a great movie, but I don't know if The Dark Knight is better, because you would agree, Steve, The Dark Knight is the best of those three movies,
For sure.
and it's the second. And I don't think The Dark Knight on its own is better than Back to the Future 1 on its own. There could be a conversation, but it's not better. So then I can't count that one either. So I couldn't find another pure trilogy other than The Godfather. And Godfather 3 isn't great, right? It
Yeah.
has its moments. It has one of the most iconic lines. Once I feel like I'm out, they pull me back in.
Yeah.
But yeah, there wasn't another trilogy I could find.
And I think a lot of people have been talking about it over the last couple of weeks, kind of just filling people in on fun facts about either the first movie or just the trilogy in general and things that have happened in it. And, one of the all-time casting what-ifs comes down to the role of Jennifer Parker. And what's interesting is, and even obviously with Eric Stoltz being originally cast as Marty McFly, they filmed, I think, 3/4 of the film with him in the role. And
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question because I've read it, and then I've read interviews with Melora Hardin, who was initially cast as Jennifer Parker. But Melora Hardin has said, at least as far as I know, she never filmed the movie. But if Eric Stoltz filmed 3/4 of the movie and Melora Hardin was originally cast as Jennifer Parker, where am I missing here? Why wasn't Melora Hardin why didn't she ever film anything?
It's what's interesting is there's so much brought up about Eric, especially in the making of. You hear a lot about him, and Melora is definitely a footnote more than anything. And when you go back and look at the original cast logs, you would imagine she had to film something, because even Tom Wilson said we were at the point of the movie where we were like wrapping up.
Yeah.
We were almost there, and perhaps they didn't shoot the Jennifer scenes yet, because really, I'm trying to think, she's only in the first part of the movie briefly.
Yeah.
And then she's there at the end.
At the
right.
end, yeah.
So maybe they started with a lot of 55 stuff, but I've seen stills of Eric and Doc in the Twin Pines parking lot. So I don't know. I don't know what happened and why she didn't get the scenes. Maybe just on the schedule that she wasn't on it just yet. And I know Bob Gale said that it's like one of the great regrets, or one of the hardest things he had to do, was to let go of Melora Hardin, and it was only because she was too tall.
Yeah.
Like, that was the only reason. Like, hey, you're too much taller than Michael J. Fox. We can't do it. Eric Stoltz has a bigger stature. Yeah, but she went on to have a great career, as did Eric. Eric had a good career. So it worked out for everybody. But yeah, to me, they haven't shown the Eric Stoltz footage, at length. And I would love just to call somebody, be like, can I just see it? Like, you don't have to put it out. Can I just see it?
Yeah.
Because we've seen hints of it, but never the full thing. And you wonder if it was truly bad, or it just wasn't what they were looking for.
Yeah, and I think it is weird because you go on YouTube, you can see the deleted scenes of Eric Stoltz. We don't have any sound on any of these scenes. That's the other weird thing, is there's no sound. We just see some of the scenes that he shot in the malt shop, walking around Hill Valley, the town square, and at the night that he shows Doc the Save the Clock Tower. Like, we've seen the scenes. They're on YouTube, but there's no sound. And we've seen plenty of still photos. And that's why I was just like, well, if there's stuff out there with Eric, how could there not be anything with Melora? So it must be, considering that Jennifer is only in the very beginning and then only in the quick stuff at the end. Maybe they did just shoot the main part of the movie and they added Jennifer in after they cast Claudia as Jennifer.
Yeah. I mean, it could very well be. Because they wanted Claudia at first, and Claudia then had a scheduling conflict with the series she was shooting called Off the Rack. So that she was originally hired, or they wanted her, but she couldn't make it, and then she ended up getting the part anyway. So that early movie, like the first 1 so much had to go right. Like so much had to go right in order for that film to actually become the classic that it was. I mean, even and I go into it in the book, even the different ending of going to the nuclear test site and Marty's a video pirate. And there's Coca-Cola that powers the flux capacitor. Like, there's so many small, weird things of like, wow, like how different of a movie would that have been if they did that? And would we still be talking about it 40 years later? So I just think that they hit one of the great cinematic streaks of luck for all these pieces to fall perfectly.
And that the time traveling vehicle would be originally was a refrigerator. Like what,
refrigerator.
Just to think that what he just hops into a refrigerator, and then it was something about a nuclear reactor site in the Mojave Desert. It was just like, how's this movie? Like, it's amazing. Like you said, the jump that they got to, oh, let's do a fancy car, and it's popular in the 80s. Oh, they really go with the DeLorean. It was just such a great choice to go into that from where we were and the bare bones of the script in the beginning. Just like, wow, there are some really good changes that were made considering the final product we got.
Yes. And two, like, I mean, again, Michael J. Fox elevates this movie to like a whole different level. But even like Doc, like getting Christopher Lloyd in there, just he was the right guy. You go into it. Jeff Goldblum was considered. You could kind of see Jeff Goldblum maybe. I saw on one of the early cast sheets, Eddie Murphy was a consideration for Doc Brown. Yeah, which you could be like, okay, maybe now, like Eddie now as Doc Brown, I would kind of buy. But Eddie in '85, when he's like super Eddie Axel Foley, it's a whole different movie. So many things broke right. But also, one of the things, Steve, that I love is where something that the filmmakers wanted to do, and for some reason they fell in love with it so much that they had to insert it somewhere else at a different point in time. Like when you think about the refrigerator scene, they wanted to do what? They wanted to have the time machine be a refrigerator, take it in a truck to a nuclear test site in the Mojave Desert, blow it up, and then Marty goes back to the future. And then what does Steven Spielberg do later in Indiana Jones 4? Right? We're in Area 51. I don't even remember
Indiana Jones 4. I remember
we're in Area 51. Their nuclear bomb is going off. They're doing a nuclear test site. Nuclear bomb's going off. How does Indy save his life? He jumps into a refrigerator, and they nuke the refrigerator, but he survives it because it's lead lined. Right?
I don't remember. I barely remember the movie, but yeah, now that you bring it up, exactly.
But that's so they have this idea back in '85, and then in '08 we see it make the film. And what's also funny, and this is like a big aside, but there was a movie they were going to do with Nick Cage as Superman called Superman Lives, and the director or the producer of the movie, John Peters, who he had produced the first Batman film and done a lot. He wanted a giant spider in the movie to fight Superman, and he was in love with this idea of a spider. Didn't happen because that movie didn't happen. And then he does Wild Wild West with Will Smith, and what's the big cinematic closing is the evil guy's on a big mechanical spider. So it's just funny how these filmmakers get this idea in their head. They're like, I got to use this somewhere.
Well, what's interesting is, and this is something that I had to explain to people as I've kind of turned a lot of people on in the last couple of weeks. I've had some readers say, Steve, as much as you've talked about it, I remember seeing it. I've seen it on cable over the years, but you're making me want to rewatch it. I've had so many people reach out, and it's been awesome to hear, and turning their kids onto it who are like 5 and 10 years old that are now seeing it for the first time, and like, oh, my kids, they were a little confused by it, but they loved the trains, and they loved that aspect of it. And one thing that I think people don't grasp as someone who grew up, who was 10 years old when this movie came out, is at the very end of this movie, when Doc's DeLorean starts flying, people don't seem to comprehend in 1985 what a big deal that was. And we were sitting in a movie theater going, oh my gosh, this might be the coolest thing I've ever seen. And at the time that happens, there's no sequel that they're even thinking about. They don't know. It doesn't even say in the original movie, it doesn't say to be continued when the DeLorean flies off the screen. It does when it's released, I believe, on VHS, right? That's when it came. But I'm trying to get people to understand, like, if you're seeing it now for the first time, look, I get it. It's 40 years ago. Maybe you were born in the 90s or early 2000s, but you have to understand how big of a deal it was sitting in a theater watching this car elevate and then take off into the air in 1985. It blew people's minds in the audience.
Oh, I can only imagine. I mean, it's one of the big regrets in my life, I guess, if there are any, is that I wasn't born earlier so that I
Yeah,
could have seen this movie in the theaters during its original run. Because I'm one of those early '90s babies. But to me, again, so many things had to go right, and that flying DeLorean to end the movie, you couldn't write a better ending because even if they never did a sequel, even if they never did any other ones, it's
great
still the
ending.
perfect ending to the movie. And what would be great if they left it there is that for 40 years we would have all been writing the second movie in our head. Oh, I think this happened, and then they probably went and did that. Then they went here. But the fact that they did a sequel, so many of the iconic moments or the iconography of Back to the Future really does come from Back to the Future Part 2 when you think about it. Like the hoverboard, the Pepsi Perfect, the Nike Air Mags, um, uh, uh, the paying with stuff with your thumbprint, the flying DeLorean, the
Hol-
almanac, like so many,
Holograms.
yeah, holograms. So many of these things in Back to the Future 2, you can make the argument even outdid its predecessor just in the iconography
Yeah.
of that sequel. There's so much in there because they expand the story and reimagining the future. It's so great. Actually, you talk about rewatching the movie. So I've seen these films, I don't know how many times, but now I find myself just watching the background and
Yeah,
not the foreground. I just look at the
exactly.
background for the whole movie, and things that you would have thought on first watch, second watch, you would have seen. Like it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I was watching it, and I noticed in Back to the Future Part 2, the logo of the mall. Have you ever noticed the logo of the mall in Back to the Future 2? Do you know what it
Which
is?
mall?
So the hill. So okay, great question. The Hill Valley uh, City Hall that we see in Back to the Future and Back to the Future 2 that Doc Brown swings down from where the clock tower is,
Yeah.
that becomes a mall in 2015, right? It's the shopping mall. So the logo of the shopping mall that was the clock tower, have you ever noticed what the logo of it is?
No.
So it is a clock with a lightning bolt striking it.
Mm.
Go back, and when you see it, you'll be like, how did I not see that in the first viewing of this movie?
Yeah.
It's all over the place in the film, and that's what I love. I
Yeah.
love seeing they go to the he goes to the antique store in Back to the Future Part 2, and you see Roger Rabbit in the window. Never noticed that until recently. Doc Brown's got like a Gremlins trading card or something on him. There's all those Easter eggs that I think that, yeah, if you watch the movie 100 times, like you or I, we notice. But I just wonder, like, was that just for the filmmakers? Be like, hey, we're gonna throw this fun thing in there. No one will ever notice this, but this is for us.
For me, that's what I've been doing. And the things that I've noticed, especially about two, because I love two, just being a gambler myself, and I'm just enthralled by the whole Gray Sports Almanac thing, is a couple things that I noticed about two. If you really pause it on when Doc is looking at the USA Today, slam ball is a sport in 2015, which also became a sport, not the slam ball that they had described it to be, but
Right.
slam ball became a sport. It was on
Spike, I think.
Spike TV for a
Yeah.
while, and then what's really kind of funny is if you look in the background at all the storefronts in alternate 2015, it is literally just a bunch of porn shops. And if you look at the titles of them, I had them at one point on my phone and I don't have them now. But if you look at all the shops when Marty is kind of in this dystopian 2015, he doesn't realize or 1985, he doesn't realize where he is. If you look at all the stores as the bikers are on their motorcycles driving around, it is literally a lot of porn stuff, which is just kind of funny because Biff is this kind of Trump-like character in alt 1985, and it almost kind of fits,
No, I mean, and Bob, it's not even that he was Trump-like, but Bob Gale said they based him
off Trump.
on the Donald. And when you think about Donald Trump in the 80s, like let's throw all the politics out of it, right? Like
Yeah.
billionaire, gambler, casino owner, little bit like notorious for being a womanizer at the time, big old comb over, the
Comb over,
blondish
yeah.
comb over. It's Biff. It's 100% Biff.
Yeah.
And it made sense that it would be that way, the way that it was in that alternate, the Biff horrific period, as they call it.
So one thing that I realized 2 weeks ago when watching, because I was like, I want to look into this a little bit more. And this is one of those things, like you said, you're just looking at background stuff. And this is something that at the time I've known for a while, which is when 2015 Biff goes to 1955 and gives young Biff the almanac, and they sit in the car and they're listening to the radio game. It's one of the reasons I love this movie franchise, because they were so good with continuity. And, old Biff is like, hey, listen to this game. I bet you UCLA wins 1917. You do the research on that. November 12th, 1955, UCLA beat Washington 1917 on a field goal. Now, the only thing that was different in the movie, it was a game-winning field goal. If you read online, he kicked the game-winning field goal with 18 seconds left, so maybe there was a chance that Washington could have run the kickback. But later, and I always knew that, but then later on, when Biff is escaping on the road with the almanac, and the announcer turns on the radio and says, let's go over today's college football scores. I was like, wait a second. I want to write down all these scores and then Google them to see if all these are accurate. I did it. This was like a week ago I did this. First off, the announcer listed scores of 10 football games from that day. All 10 of them. Exact same teams, the right winner, and the right score.
Wow.
Except for one. And some intern must have just gotten this wrong. He had somebody winning 20 to 10. The final score was 20-12. That was it. And I was just like, okay. So they were off one score by 2 points. But every other game, I had written them down, and I just Googled the game. Michigan, Indiana, November 12th, 1955. Hit enter. Boom. There was the score. And I was like, yeah. So 9 out of 10. Not bad.
And you know what? I just did another podcast a few weeks ago with a guy named Chris Jericho, who's a wrestler back in the day. And we talked about Back to the Future 2 exclusively for about an hour and a half. And when you think of that movie in particular, and I want to pose the question to you, is there a more nutso, over-the-top, like difficult, ambitious sequel that's ever been made? Because you're juggling essentially three timelines, right? You have original 85, you have 2015, you have alternate 85, and then you go back to 55. So yeah, the four.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the movie, Doc goes to the 1880s, but we don't get there until later. But so you have 4 timelines that you're juggling. One of the timelines has to do with the first movie explicitly. Like it's in the exact same week that Marty's there, the same day that Marty's there. And so then you have to film that from a different angle, figure out how to make that story work to where you don't really interrupt the events of Back to the Future Part 1, because if you interrupt those too much, then Part 1 doesn't exist anymore. So we would be living in this parallel universe. I can't imagine the conversations that they were sitting and having when they were making this movie. Like, wait, no, we can't do that, because then if we do that, then this is different. And like it's like Inception.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing that I've explained to people is, first off, 2 is a lot darker, and 2, you really have to think about what you're watching, because you can't just go through it and be like, yeah, I understood all of that. Especially, I saw it at 14 years old. I know for a fact I didn't walk out of that theater and understand every time jump they did, because we were also at a time where there wasn't a lot of time travel in movies, and if there was, it wasn't explained as well as this, because you've said it in your books, like this movie basically paved the way for how we as an audience perceive time travel. We all know time travel isn't real. It can't happen. So we have to go off, well, what rules? And Back to the Future established these rules of time travel where you're like, these are the perfect rules for if time travel was real. This is what it should be. Other movies have taken liberties with it. The Terminator franchise has, the Marvel franchise pretty much took it from Back to the Future. They even discuss it in Endgame. But again, that's what's so amazing about this movie is they really set the tone for, hey, if you ever want to talk about time travel, this is how it should be done. If you go back in time, you are going to affect the events of the future. And I just think it's super, super cool. But 2, you really have to pay attention of like, okay, wait, where is Marty now? Oh, he's in an alternate 1985. Why doesn't he just go back, or why doesn't he just go to the future? They're literally explaining it on a chalkboard to you during the movie so you understand. So that's why I know it's not easy to just get through it and be like, oh, yeah, totally got that.
No, Back to the Future 2, it takes a couple rewatches to understand the stakes. I completely agree with you. And the fact, like, understanding the and they do it in the first act, but just understanding what a paradox is and like how that can unravel. And Doc is, Mr. Exposition in all three of these movies, right? He's explaining the stakes and why things can and can't happen and what will happen if they do happen and things of that nature, and does so in the best of ways, including literally getting the chalkboard, as you said, and writing it out so that we as the audience go, oh, that's what happened. Yeah. Which also, while we're having this conversation, makes me understand even more why they cut old man Biff disappearing.
I was just going to get into that with you, but go ahead.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it makes sense though now, because the movie at its face is so confusing in a lot of ways. You're juggling multiple timelines, alternate timelines, paradoxes, changing the past, future, present. What's going on? We don't really know. So I guess adding an additional tertiary element of, Biff disappearing might have been one too many for the audience. I still think you could have left it in, but it is what it is.
Because it's only, 5 seconds of
5 seconds.
When he returns to 2015 from 1955, giving him his younger self the almanac, he basically disappears and fades into oblivion like Marty's brother and sister did in the picture. And the explanation is that, well, what is I mean, I know that the writers have said Lorraine shot him in 1978 or something like that, but what was I always took it as, once I found out that deleted scene existed, I just took it as when he gave himself the almanac, he changed his future. So he had to basically disappear. That Biff did not exist anymore. The 2015 Biff did not exist because he had given his other self the almanac.
Yeah, well, the official explanation, and you alluded to it, was from Bob Gale. And now Bob Gale even kind of changed that explanation in some of the comics, if you read some of the comic books. But what happens is Biff gives himself the almanac, so therefore he does change the entire course of his life. And we know from the alternate 1985, he goes to marry Lorraine, and he's married to Lorraine in 1985. Well, in the early 90s, she shoots him because she murders him, and then that's why he's not there in 2015. This was first discussed by, of all people, Kirk Cameron, who says it in the Secrets of the Back to the Future trilogy in just a one-off line. But that is the official story. I think in the comics, and I'd have to go back and look because it's been some time since I did the research for that chapter, but it was, I think in one of the comics, Kit Tannen, which is Biff's 1920s relative who was like the gangster of Hill Valley and ran the prohibition ring, I think comes back into the 80s somewhere, and then he's the one who shoots him or something like that. And in that comic series, Biff ends up becoming president. There's another connection to the Donald. But yeah, I think that's what it is. But I thought as a kid, whenever old man Biff comes back and he's so just haggard and looks like he's gone through hell, I thought that was, they're showing us the effects of time travel. Like sometimes they can actually have a physical effect on you. And I thought maybe they're laying that into the story, but obviously that wasn't the case.
I think one thing that hit me again a couple weeks ago when I watched 2 was, Doc's whole thing was you can't run into your other self. It could cause, all sorts of problems. It could cause a paradox. But then I'm thinking maybe this is why Biff disintegrated when he got back to 2015, because he had just spent a whole time in a car talking to his younger self. Like, isn't that against technically the space-time continuum? You're not supposed to encounter your other self. Old Biff had literally a conversation in a car sitting right next to his younger self, which is the only one in the trilogy where two people that are the same person in different timelines are conversing with each other. Yes, Doc from 2015 is talking to Doc from 1955, but they're not looking at each other, the handing off the wrench and all that. But I was like, wait a second. Maybe that's why when Biff got back to 2015, because he had just experienced this with his younger self, but I guess maybe not.
Well, but no, think about this though, Steve, is when Elizabeth Shute Jennifer and is in 2015, the 85 version of her, he runs into the 2015 version of her. And then the younger one says, I'm old. The older one says, I'm young. They recognize each other and they faint. Okay. With Biff and Biff, young Biff doesn't even understand who this person is. right? He doesn't recognize himself in him. He doesn't see himself in him as an old man. And old Biff says, well, I'm just a distant relative. Old Biff knew he was going to run into him, just like Doc in when 1985 Doc runs into 55 Doc. His back's to him. He doesn't want 55 Doc to see him because that could cause the paradox on 55 Doc. But 85 Doc knew he could see 55 Doc, so therefore, I guess there's not a paradox. I don't know. We're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but I think that may be the explanation.
That's a good explanation, though. That makes sense to me now that you explain it that way. Is that 55 Bith had no idea who he was in, who was this old man was in his car.
Just a stranger, yeah.
Yeah, just a stranger. And the other ones you're actively trying to avoid, like Elizabeth Shue, Jennifer was trying to get out of that house without running into her former self. She knew where she was. She was watching, Marty, watching their kids, but tried to avoid herself. So that's a good explanation. I've always wondered, how do you, when you explain this to people who maybe haven't seen it or aren't well versed in the Back to the Future world and trilogy, how have you explained time travel to those people? Because when I first showed this to my niece and nephew who were in their teens at the time, and I explained it to them, they were, asking questions like, wait, but how does that happen? I said, first off, again, you have to think fourth dimensionally. This isn't real, so you have to take their rules for it. But how have you described time travel to people? Because I have a certain way I've done it. I'm just curious how you
like how do I explain the Back to the Future time travel, or time travel in general? Or
how would you explain what if someone had just seen the movie? How do I done this? How would you explain if it were real in today's world? If you could do this in 2015, how would you explain it to somebody? Maybe I have to explain how I...
Well, I guess I would say, like the mechanics of the time machine, we understand the flux capacitor generates a time rift in which you drive through, and it's set to a specific date. The rules of time travel,
more about
anything that you do in the past will affect the future, no matter how big or small. You don't know if it's going to have a positive or a negative impact, but an impact will be had. So I guess that's because that's really the crux of the whole movie, is that when Marty goes back to 55 and interrupts his parents from meeting the first time, his whole future begins to unravel because he's never going to be born, right?
Yeah.
So I think that using that as an example, I guess, is the best. But how do you do it? How do you explain it?
Okay. So this was the way I explained it to my niece and nephew, and this could be convoluted, but I was saying, imagine your life is... You're watching your life on a DVR. When you turn on a movie on a DVR, the movie's 2 hours long. So let's just say for your life, the beginning of that movie is your birth. The 2 hour point is where we're at right now. If you go back to 10 years ago, you're going back and you're just inserting yourself at that point. That's what Marty did. This is he went back before his birth. So that's the way I was trying to explain it. It's just like, this is just one wide, if you could go back in time. See, this is the thing. It's hard to think about it because we can't do this, but you have to just pretend if you were able to go back in time, everything that happened on November 5th, 1955 is still happening somewhere in the world, and you're just popping into it. And what you do there could affect what happens in the future, but you just have to think, again, fourth dimensionally about it. And that's how I've described it. I've described it as watching a television or a movie, and your whole life is that 2 hour thing, and you're just rewinding and going back to a certain point, going back to your senior year of high school, going back to, fifth grade when you won your soccer tournament, and you can go back and watch that yourself. At some place in the world, you can get in a car and go to that point and watch that point. And they were like, oh, I get it. So he went back before he was alive. I said, yes, he went back to when his parents were in high school. So,
well, you know what? And to me, it's still why Back to the Future is the best explanation of how to do time travel in film, because they do keep it linear.
Yeah.
Like Marvel has all the branches, and then you have the TVA, and then you have this, and you have that, and you kind of do get lost in like, what is this? And there's a multiverse. In Back to the Future, on its face, there's not a multiverse. There's one universe. There's one timeline. And then even if you affect it in the past, it affects your current timeline, and then everything that happens after that. it's to me easier to follow than some of the more convoluted ones. Like there was a series, I think it was called 11/22/63, with James Franco stars, and
That's
he
right.
like goes back to stop. It's a Stephen King, I think,
To
concept
stop the
where
Kennedy assassination,
to
right?
stop the Kennedy assassination. And I will say it was convoluted because it's like you go through a door and you're there, and I don't really I didn't understand it. But the one thing I did like about that one is if you tried to change the events of the past, time would try to correct itself in order for the events to still play out the same exact way, which I kind of enjoyed that aspect. But yeah, Back to the Future still does it first. And to me, when I explain this movie to people in general who've never seen it, and when I run into somebody who's never seen Back to the Future, it's like the greatest day of my life because I'm like, oh my God, can you
Same.
go home tonight and can you watch it and then can you call me and then we can talk about it?
Same.
Because I go, when I was a kid, my reason for loving this movie changes. And maybe that's same with you, Steve. Like the older I get, I look at the film from different perspective. When I was a kid, it was just cool. There's a cool kid who skateboards, plays rock and roll, gets in an awesome looking car, and is able to travel through time. It's amazing. As I get older, when I was maybe, in my early to mid 20s, I'm like, oh, wow, it's a movie about like going back to school with your parents. And like, would you be cool with your parents if you're in high school? And then you start thinking about, I wonder what my dad was like, or I wonder what my mom was like. And now where I'm at now, in a couple weeks, I'll be 33 years of age. I think about it in a completely different standpoint. I go, wow, this movie's about choices. This movie is about choices. And if I didn't make this choice, then this wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't happen. And I'm not talking to Steve right now, and to me, that butterfly effect is the most interesting thing about Back to the Future as I get older. And so that's what I tell people now. I'm like, the movie boils down to it's about the choices you make in life and how one choice can alter the entire course of your future. And I think that we're all can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's about as well said as you can put. Like, I just look at the movie differently now. Same thing when I was a kid. It was just cool. Everyone was talking about it. Michael J. Fox was probably the most popular actor at the time because he was the star of Family Ties, was his top 3 television show on network television every week. And then we get to see him do this completely different role, action-packed. It was just cool. And then as I get older and you make choices, like you said, and then you look at it now, and it's just such a nostalgic feeling, and that's why I loved your book so much, because it's a trip down memory lane. It's nostalgia for someone like me who turned 50 this year and has seen this movie so many times. I went to the movie theater to see the 30-year anniversary. I went 2 weeks ago to see the 40-year anniversary. I bought the $35 popcorn out of it. Like, this has become my obsession. I'm doing, tomorrow night. I just started a Patreon this week. It's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I'm starting a Patreon this week, and we're doing a live rewatch tomorrow night of Back to the Future, where I'm going to try not to talk over the movie. I'm not going to pause it or whatever, but I'm just going to chime in here and there and give commentary during it. So, and just, again, like the amount of emails I've gotten over the last couple of weeks of people saying, like, I love hearing your Back to the Future stuff. Did not know about Spaceman from Pluto. I had no idea about Eric Stoltz. Like, people just... you think because I'm a fan of it, like I expect everyone else to know. Very few, there's obviously a subset of society that does know all these little intricate things, but most people don't, and they loved hearing about it, and it was great.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because this, just like my love and like the reason I love the movie changes, my order of the 3 change over time. Consistently, they change. Do you have a preference or like, do you enjoy, because you mentioned 2, is like 2 your favorite, but like, because I think we can agree 1 is perfect.
Yes.
Like 1 is like, if we're talking about like like which films are the best, 1 is always going to be 1, but 1 doesn't necessarily mean that that's your favorite of the 3. What is your favorite of, like, what's your ranking?
It changes. It really does. I think I can honestly say that 3 has never been my favorite. And I think that probably goes for most people. I think. But the more I've watched 3 in recent years, I appreciate it more because I look at it more as a bow on a great trilogy. Before, I just looked at it as a standalone movie. And to me, it's not a standalone. It's the ending and a bow of everything that they had put together for the first two. And that's what made me enjoy it a lot more. A film on its own by itself, I've just never been into Westerns. But when I watch the movie and I watch the callbacks that they do from the first two, I'm just like, I almost can't distinguish it. I mean, honestly, Back to the Future trilogy is just one long movie. You should sit and watch 3 in a row. They're not 3 separate movies that have nothing to do with each other, clearly. So I vacillate between 1 and 2. 1, like you said, perfect movie. I can watch it all day long. I can watch 2 all day long. 3, you kind of have to convince me to sit down and watch it again. But I do appreciate the way it ended. And Doc's message at the very end, I think, is perfect for how this franchise should have wrapped up. And it's why I am anti rebooting this franchise. I am anti trying to do something, making a 4th one. I don't want it. You know, Brad, I know that you've talked about that. You've discussed it in your book. I don't think you want it, but you wouldn't be against it, right?
I don't want it. I am not actively campaigning for it. But yeah. the argument that I make in the book is when I love Ghostbusters. I love Ghostbusters. And Ghostbusters 2, I enjoy. I don't love it like I love the first one, but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Ghostbusters that's now been called Answer the Call, which was the first reboot of the franchise with the all-female cast. Had nothing to do with the all-female cast, because I know people made that like a political thing, and I didn't mind that whatsoever. I just didn't like the movie that much.
Yeah,
I just didn't like it.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It just wasn't that good to me. And I thought that would then make me reflect and go, oh, I don't like now, like it's lessen my love for Ghostbusters in general, but it actually didn't affect it whatsoever. And then I saw Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I go, oh, I love this movie. And it kind of was like, maybe they can do like a new Ghostbusters and it be good. Then I saw Frozen Empire. I was like, I didn't really like that one. But I love Ghostbusters Afterlife. And so if they did another Back to the Future, I'm not campaigning for it, but I would not be holding picket signs and going, damn you for making this. I would go in with an open mind. And if I loved it, well, then guess what, Steve? I got 40 more years to watch another great Back to the Future film that I get to talk about and look at the background of. If I didn't like it, I never will acknowledge it again or its existence or presence. But I will say they make a great Back to the Future joke, Back to the Future 4 joke at the end of the musical. Have you seen the musical?
That was the next thing I was going to talk about with you.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. Well, the thing I wanted to mention about that and, possibly a remake or a reboot is, I think you know the answer to this. If one were to be made, whether it's a 4th or a reboot of the original, do the Gales have to sign off on it?
Yes. So Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis have to sign off on it. Yeah.
Okay. So 2 new writers in Hollywood can't say we've got a great deal. We're just making it. They have to get approval from both Bobs. And I would think if there is a reboot or is a 4th, and the Gales somehow get convinced that 2 young writers have this great idea and they read the script and they like it, they're still going to be a part of it. I just don't think they're going to be like, yeah, okay, go make it. We're not going to step on your toes. I would think anybody who does want to do a reboot or a 4th is going to want input from Bob Zemeckis and or Bob Gale. They have to.
Yeah, both preferably, right? I think that Bob Gale has become the steward of all things Back to the Future and the father of time, really. So he knows it better than anybody on this planet. There's a few other people who know Back to the Future intimately, but not as much as even Bob. I don't even think Robert Zemeckis would tell you that he knows as much about Back to the Future as Bob Gale does. So I would defer to Gale first. And if Gale gave it the sign off, I remember I talked to the guys from Cobra Kai, who started the Cobra Kai spinoff. And I remember talking to them, and they said they have this great Back to the Future idea of how to do it. They have a perfect Back to the Future idea. And so when I talked to Bob Gale, I brought it up to him. I said, hey, the guys from Cobra Kai say they have a great way to go to Back to the Future for a TV series. And he goes, if the guys from Cobra Kai want to make a series about time travel, they can do it, but they're not going to be making it about Back to the Future. And so to me, it just told me he's like off completely. He's just not into the idea at all. So I don't think that we're going to see it, at least in their lifetimes.
And I'm fine with that. But you mentioned the musical, and I had heard the rumblings, getting great reviews overseas, and there was a part of me that's like, how are they going to make a musical out of this? I went and saw it about 6 months ago. I saw it in March of this year when it came to Dallas, and I was blown away. I was like, that was incredible. And I did not think, and I'm not a musical guy. I think I've seen like 3 or 4 in my life. So my expectations were pretty low. I was hoping, and then I was just like, well, how is every other thing going to be sung? How much of the original music is going to be in this? But it blew me away. And you talk about it in your book. You loved it as well. And again, for people that love the franchise, love the trilogy, again, it's more of just a feeling of nostalgia. For 2 hours, we get to watch a musical performance of one of our favorite movies of all time. It was excellent.
And the change, and I don't want to spoil them for the people, but the changes that they make, because there are changes that they made to the story from Back to the Future 1 and then the musical itself. There's small changes, but changes nonetheless. They all worked for me. I liked them all. I wasn't mad at any of them. They made complete sense to me. And then the joke, they do have a joke about Back to the Future 4 at the end of it. So if people go see the musical, they'll know what we're talking about. But I did like that. But real quick, to go back to your point about Back to the Future 3, and really the trilogy as a whole, to me, I can watch Back to the Future 1 on its own. I can watch it over, done, don't need to watch anything else. If I watch Back to the Future 2, I have to watch Back to the Future 3. I have to watch them back to back. It's hard for me to just go, okay, I'm going to end the story there. I have to watch Back to the Future Part 3. And Part 3, in the last 3-4 years, is my favorite of the trilogy.
Really?
It's my favorite of the trilogy. Christopher Lloyd shares in that favoritism. I think he probably likes it for certain reasons because he kind of has a different spin on Doc. And he had done a Western with Mary Steenburgen before the Jack Nicholson directed Going South. Yeah. So maybe it was just kind of nostalgic for him as well. But I love Back to the Future 3 because it reminds me, I'm a Texas guy, as you know. And to me, Westerns are embedded in my DNA. I watched them with my father growing up and my grandfather. So I like a Western. And Back to the Future 3 is more similar to Back to the Future 1 than Back to the Future 2 is similar to 1, in the sense of it's Marty and Doc stuck in the past with no clear way forward. They have to figure out by some happenstance how to get out of the past by a certain date, or else they're stuck there forever. So I did like that aspect of it. And I don't know, Doc in a cowboy hat, there's something romantic about it. But yeah, between that and but going back to the musical is phenomenal. And I'm like you, I'm also a musical guy. So it wasn't a hard sell for me, but I did go, okay, am I just going to go in there and I'm going to, hear these songs that are just, they feel like they're just, because, sometimes musicals, they'll bust into song and it's not really furthering the plot. It's just, we need a song here and we need a dance number. And I didn't feel like that at all. I felt like all the songs worked. They propelled the story forward. And the production, I've seen a lot of Broadway. I've seen a lot of live theater. I'm a big theater fan, and the production of the musical is sensational. Like the sets, the equipment, the effects is amazing. The first time the DeLorean appears on the stage, you're gobsmacked by how they were able to pull that off. At least when I saw it in 2023, November 2023, so 2 years ago on Broadway at the Wintergreen Theater, and I was blown away by it.
Yeah, it was so good. And I was just like, well, we're just going to get Power of Love and Back in Time. And then there's there's about 15 other songs that they created just for this musical around plot lines. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm sitting there going, like, this is, like you said, it advanced the plot. It was really cool to watch. And that's interesting that you say that about, 3 being, right now, currently your favorite. Again, I don't want to, it is funny that you say I have to watch 2. If I watch 2, I have to watch 3. Makes sense. And that brings me to the other point of, again, being in the movie theater in 1989 and 2 coming to an end. And right when 2 ends, we're seeing, the preview for season 3. We're seeing the preview for part 3, which is coming out. I believe it came out, 6 months later than when 2 was released. I want to say 2 came out in November of 89, and then the summer of 90 is when.
May of 1990.
May of 90. So yeah. So again, just like the end of 1, when that DeLorean takes off and flies, being in the theater and seeing 2, and again, there was no internet, there was no social media back then. I don't know, and it's hard to put myself back at 14 years old and what I knew at the time.
Sure.
And I don't know what America knew, but I don't know what the overriding theme was, and if people knew that 2 and 3 were shot together, and at the end of 2, we were going to see previews for 3. I just know when I was sitting in the theater and I saw a preview for 3 right when 2 ends, I'm like, that's, again, one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because that just didn't happen in movies back then. You didn't already have the next movie made and ready to go in the can, and you were basically just splitting it up into 2 parts, kind of like what they did with Wicked now. So, yeah, just random, but very, very cool. Another movie experience where you're like, oh my gosh, and now you're almost upset leaving the theater because you're like, I got to wait 6 months for this, or I got to wait till next summer to watch the ending of this trilogy. But yeah. And again, I don't remember what it was in the public eye of, did people know that this was shot back to back? I don't remember. I don't know.
You would know better than I, but I don't know, how much was known, but I do know the ending of Back to the Future 2 does leave you so like, I have to see this movie now. And exactly. I think that's why I watch them back to back. But I will tell the story. So from Saturday Night Live, Mikey Day, who's a cast member on SNL, he wrote the foreword for the Why We Love Back to the Future. And Harry Waters Jr., who is Marvin Berry, wrote an introduction to the book, which I was so blessed to have them. And Jeffrey Wiseman. So many people actually contributed to the book. But the way I got Mikey Day to write the foreword, I stole from the ending of Back to the Future Part 2. Because I was like, this guy probably gets so many letters and pieces of fan mail and whatever. How am I going to get Mikey Day, who I knew was this huge Back to the Future fan? How am I going to get him to write the foreword? So one of the things I did was I wrote a letter to him. And on the top of the letter, I put the Western Union logo. Mm-hmm. And I crumbled this letter up and made it all wrinkly. I soaked it in tea. So it had like a brown color to it. I burned part of the edges or whatever. And I went out and bought a leather envelope, and I put it in a leather envelope, and I had it delivered to 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And I didn't hear anything for 3 or 4 months. And then one day I get an email from Mikey Day saying, hey, I just received the coolest piece of mail I've ever gotten in my life. I would love to write the foreword to your book. And I was like, yes, it worked.
Yeah. When I read that in your book, I was like, that is so cool. That Mikey did that. That is in a really inventive way. When it's so easy to read, you could have probably hit him up on Instagram. It might have gone to his request folder or a Twitter DM, but you just never know. Or got in contact with agents, whatever the
publicist or something. But I just felt like if he's a fan, which he is, he's going to respond to this. I know it. And then with the passing weeks and months go by, I go, maybe he's not into the idea. But then he finally did it.
It's funny that you mentioned the end of 2, and that was one of the things that I think when my nephew saw it, probably the first time around 10 or 11 years old, the very end of 2, when 1955 Doc sends 1985, Marty back to 1985, and then the original 1985 Marty comes running around the corner. I think that kind of can fry people's brains because they're not thinking, like I said, you got to think of what time period you're watching at all times when watching 2, because you'd be like, wait, why did he just come around the corner? And I think that, like I said, is something that makes 2, and maybe 2 was panned a little bit because it got too confusing and too much time jumping and too many timelines here. But I just think that's what made it so good. And now that I'm talking about it and talking myself into it, it's like, again, maybe 2 is my favorite deep down. 1 will always be the best one, but 2 might be my favorite because I love the Gray Sports Almanac of it. I just love that aspect, the gambling part of it. Biff, alternate 1985 Biff, I thought was such an over-the-top character, but so well played. And I believe we talked about this the first time you were on the podcast, that people don't understand. Say what you want about Thomas F. Wilson. He didn't really do much outside of this franchise, but the guy played 7 different characters in a trilogy. Like, that's just... Let's give the guy some credit for that. It's a huge
amazing
role. Yeah.
He's the best, like as far as like performer, what he had, the load that he had to carry in those movies and playing the differences between himself in every film. And yeah, you got to give him his props. And you know who else you have to give the props to, though, really, is Robert Zemeckis. I thought about this the other day of, I'm a big wrestling guy.
Yeah.
And in wrestling, we talk about people in terms of their run. Like, what was Hogan's run? It was like 85 to 90. What was Stone Cold Steve Austin's run? It was 98 through 01, right? So you think about things in runs. And when I thought about Robert Zemeckis' run as a director, if we start with 84,
it's unreal.
And he had Romancing the Stone in 84, which I love that movie. 85 is Back to the Future. 88 is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. 89 is Back to the Future 2. 90 is Back to the Future 3. 92 is Death Becomes Her. And then 94 is Forrest Gump.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that 10-year run. The 7 movies, 10 years, all of them are excellent. All of them are still talked about. And a couple of them won some Academy Awards.
Yeah.
That's a run.
It's a hell of a run. I think only one equivalent is you could probably take John Hughes's run in the 80s into the early 90s, because he had a string of just bangers that, again, are classics.
Let's look up John Hughes real quick. Let's look at the.
Have you seen this run by John Hughes? Oh, but you can pull it up and go from. Let me see. I can pull it up too.
Look, we'll go from. We can go from Mr. Mom. Oh no, he was a writer. So let's go from director. First directing movie.
I was just going to do anything that he was either written or directed.
Then he's got an incredible run. You got Mr. Mom, you have Vacation, 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, European Vacation, Weird Science, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Some Kind of Wonderful, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Great Outdoors, Uncle Buck, Christmas Vacation, Home Alone.
I mean, that's 1983 to 1990. That 7-year run, and he directed, looking about it on the wiki, about half of those. He directed about half of those that you just read. He was the writer on all of them. Can you find a better 7-year run of written movies that are still talked about to this day? Because I can't. That is unbelievable.
That's a run.
that is a hell of a run. I want to end with this, because you mentioned wrestling. I knew I was going to always end this talk with wrestling, because I'm a huge wrestling fan myself. I got turned on to it in 6th grade. I've watched it ever since. Obviously, we've gone through iterations of highs and lows of a wrestling world, the Ruthless Aggression era and the Attitude Era, all this stuff. We are approaching the end of John Cena's career, and in a few weeks, he's going to have his last match in WWE. And 2 questions here. Number 1, being a huge fan of wrestling, what was your take on the Netflix Unreal show? Did you like the fact that they are now pulling back the curtain on this? We all know, we all know it's unscripted drama. We all know this isn't like these guys are really fighting. We get it. But what Unreal has done is taken it to a level that there's just this fourth wall that the WWE is breaking down as we get into the Triple H era. They're certainly breaking down. They're talking about more things that just weren't even thought of in the 80s when we were watching Superstars of Wrestling on Saturday morning, or Wrestling Challenge, or Primetime Wrestling. You didn't talk about stuff like this. Now they're literally showing you in the writer's room about where we're going with certain storylines. First off, do you like it, or as a purist, are you like, I don't think they should be showing the fans this?
Okay, so this is a deep conversation.
Yeah.
Because when I heard about Unreal, I go, okay, because I've also worked in the business, worked alongside Booker T for 13 years now, this month. Yeah. And so there is a certain quality of, if you're in the business, you go, oh, we got to protect the business. That's something that people always say. And, and maybe this conversation can get lost on some, but there's the idea of a work and a shoot and kayfabe and staying in character and all this stuff. So at first, on the onset, the purist in me did not like the idea. Then I watched the show. And then what I realized from the show is what WWE is doing, and even in their storytelling on television, is what do? You work the shoot into a work. What does that mean? You take what people actually believe, the shoot, the real, and then you make what people think is actually happening a part of the show. So you're working the shoot. Okay, best example is like CM Punk comes back to WWE. we know he's got all this heat. People hate him. Seth Rollins called him a cancer. We're going to program with Seth Rollins. We're going to have Seth Rollins go freaking out and say all these things in the media. And then you go, wait, is that how he actually feels? Oh, I thought that's how he felt, but now he's back. So what is it? And then as the fan, you're going, what's real? What's not, right?
Yeah.
With Unreal, there was a certain part in it where Triple H is discussing the John Cena heel turn.
Yeah.
And he's saying it's a well-guarded secret. And he's like, so I know I got to call 4 people, right? I got to call John. I got to call The Rock. I got to call, I think he said Bruce Pritchard. And I got to call Travis Scott. And when I heard he had to call Travis Scott, I go, this isn't work. This isn't real. This is not how this. I don't believe any of this. Yeah. So now on Unreal, I believe none of it. I think it's all an elaborate work that does give you hints of what the business is actually about. But I think that they're finding a way to utilize social media, reality, television, and docuseries in order to further work the shoot into a work. That's what I think. But maybe I'm conspiracy theorist. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we can. I mean, that's a whole conversation for another time. Is at the time, great heel turn at Elimination Chamber.
One of the best ever.
But the storyline just absolutely flopped. I cannot believe that we never got an appearance from The Rock ever since then. Like, something seems to have fallen through. Either Rock promised them something in the beginning and he didn't follow through. Because how can you do that whole heel turn surrounding Cena basically giving in to The Rock, becoming one of his people, and then The Rock never appears, even for a promo, to explain why Cena turned and joined him? It failed miserably. And I think Cena's addressed it. He said
Cena said it didn't go well.
Didn't go well. Yeah.
It didn't go well.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot. There's a lot there. Yeah, it's a whole can.
It's a whole conversation. But I want to end with this: taking contracts out of the situation, just say everybody's available. Money isn't an issue. If you were the booker, who would you have as Cena's final opponent?
You know what? This is a question that I've had with a lot of people in our locker room, with Booker himself, trying to figure out who's the perfect opponent for Cena to go out on. And to me, you could fantasy book 1,000 people. You could say him and The Rock. You could say a Brock rematch where he finally squashes him. You could say him and Adam Copeland, or whomever. To me, Cena was catapulted into superstardom by the veterans, Kurt Angle, Booker T, Undertaker, helping solidify him and get him to that main event status. If you are the guy who can defeat the greatest of all time in his final match, or at least compete against him, maybe not even defeat him, but compete against him, but I do think he should lose, who would that person be? Now we have the last time is now tournament, so my idea is not going to come to fruition, but that person would have been NXT's Obafemi. Obafemi is a guy in NXT. He was NXT champion. They call him the ruler. This guy reminds you of a Brock Lesnar in a lot of ways. Huge, dominant athlete. And I thought, what better way to launch the main roster career of Obafemi than to be defeating John Cena in his final match, and I think winning the Intercontinental Championship. I don't think that's going to play out anymore. I don't think the IC title is going to be on the line, which definitely makes me think Cena's going to win. But that was my idea. Him and Obafemi, you give somebody the rub and help launch their career into the next stratosphere as the guy who retired John Cena. That was my idea.
Interesting, because I didn't think there was any way in the world that Cena would lose his last match. That was my thinking, that they wouldn't have him go out with a loss.
So to me, like the business, you should go out on a loss. Like that's what you should do. We've changed that philosophy in recent years. You even look at the Sting retirement in AEW. Goldberg went out on his shield. Goldberg lost in what I thought was actually one of Goldberg's best matches, maybe of his career, which is saying something. And especially at his advanced age. I do think you should always lose in your final match. The Undertaker didn't do it. So it doesn't have to always be the rule, but I would have liked for it to be.
My thought process was when Elimination Chamber happened earlier this year and Cena joined The Rock, my fantasy booking knowing that John Cena's match was going to be sometime at the end of this calendar year, whether it was going to be at Survivor Series or something afterwards. We didn't know at the time. We just knew it was going to be at the end of 2025. I thought they had this all planned out. I thought it was, I'm joining The Rock. I'm going to get booed out of the building for X amount of months. And then the storyline would be that Cena would realize this isn't me. The way I've acted for the last 4 or 5 months, this just is not me. He would turn on The Rock. He would say, you made me into this, whatever the case may be. And it would end with Cena versus The Rock. I thought that was the only way it could go. But that was also my thinking back in February when this storyline started, and I figured The Rock was going to be involved in the WWE in the following 7 months, and he hasn't shown up once. So that kind of went out the door. But that was my fantasy booking. I thought they had this planned out.
It would have been great.
Join The Rock, and then he's going to turn on him, say, you made me into this. I want you for my last match. Because they were, Cena Rock was headlining numerous pay-per-views back in the day when it was called pay-per-views. They were two that obviously had a major history. They had a real life dislike for each other that turned into a mutual respect for each other. When Cena said, you know what, I called The Rock out for skipping the WWE and going to Hollywood, and I basically did the exact same thing. So who am I to call him out for that when I did the same thing myself? And then he, had a mutual respect. But yeah, I thought that's the way they were going. Now, I don't even know who they're going with in that final match, honestly. I guess Gunther. The talk is Gunther.
Seems like a logical one. And he'd give him a great match, and it'd help Gunther in the long run. But him and Rock would have been great. Rock.
If they told it that way, I think if they just threw it together, no.
No, but to me, Steve, there's a whole book about what really happened. And even the Travis Scott of it all. There's a whole lot there. There's just so much.
It's interesting. Well, anyway, Brad, thank you so much for coming on. I could have this talk with you every year. But anyone that's interested, go get the book. Why We Love Back to the Future is the book. 40 Years of Fandom, Flux Capacitors, and Timeless Adventures. Great conversation today. Love talking Back to the Future with you. I really appreciate it, Brad. And obviously, we'll be in touch, man.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, Steve. And also, while I got your listeners, go check out. I just released a new book a couple weeks ago. There's something really great about a grandma. It's a children's book. It's available now. It's a great stocking stuffer. So everybody go check that out, too.
Great. Thank you very much, man. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Steve.
You got it.